Can you explain the Mark II pipe bug? I can try to. It's so I'm sure there are really good YouTube videos to explain this problem better, but the root cause of the pipe bug is because of floating point errors or floating precision errors with floating point numbers. And really roughly, I think it's better to watch like a YouTube video explaining this rather than having me try to explain this, because this is a generic problem with computing with floating point numbers in general. But the crux of the bug is that when you have Mark II pipes, we're doing a lot of calculations, and we're doing a lot of calculations on calculations on calculations, right? So one issue when we're using floating point numbers is that floating point numbers are essentially like when you have decimal numbers, you can have theoretically an infinite amount of decimals, right? And if you want to represent certain numbers, you need like a vast amount of decimals to like properly represent like some fractals, right? When you're using computing power, and like the way that floating point numbers work is that you only have a set amount of values for decimals, and when you use floating point numbers, that value, like the amount of decimals you have, that will shift depending on the numbers, which means there are certain decimal values that you cannot represent in floating point numbers. And the issue with the pipe bug, with the Mark II pipe ones specifically, is that we are doing a lot of calculations on calculations. And when you get to like the higher values of those numbers, we shift more and more away from like the precision, and we lose out a little bit of precision. And if you have like low frame rates and we don't have um, like enough precision, we lose out a little bit. And when we lose out a little bit, after time, it becomes like visible, sort of. So the issue is with Mark VI pipes is that in certain some circumstances, they are not 600 cubic meters of water. Like they're like 597 or something like that sometimes. So it kind of shifts back and forth a little bit. So when people have built setups where they actually are required to have the full 600, like if you're overclocking nuclear power plants and stuff like that, and for how it to run, you have to have like, then you can run into issues. So why not use doubles? Because doubles are way slower to use than floats. That's the main reason why. A lot of the calculations would become very expensive if we use doubles. Why is it tied to frame rate? It's not really tied to frame rate. It's just that like during certain frames you can get a more precise number, a value, and certain frames you don't. And when things fluctuate back and forth a lot, it can seem as if like it's more off than it actually is. Similar problem with fastest belt. So not really, because fastest belt that's a visual thing more so than like actual logic running in behind the scenes. So it's more like representation of items on belts rather than like actual where things are. Belts and pipes work very differently, even though they're technically the same thing. They work very like in terms of like transporting one thing from one connection to another. They work very differently. So yeah. What if you make it pipes 611? So that makes it worse, actually. That's we actually didn't even want to go up to 600 because that's like sort of the limit for it. Because the issue becomes worse and worse the higher that value gets. It's a similar problem to, I don't know if you guys have ever heard of or seen, this is super specific to game devs, but there's a game called, and the name escapes, it's like Outer Wilds or Outer Worlds. It's one of the two. The one where you're like moving around in space, and you're like in a little spaceship. And a huge problem with that game was that the further away you get from the center of the universe, the less precise the numbers would become for like all the linear algebra that's going on for like the how things are moving, right? And there's a video where, I don't know if he's the one who posted it, but there's a video of like a globe or something that's just moving away, and the camera follows the globe as it's moving away from the center And like the further it gets, the more like it gets all jagged and shit because the precision is lost. I'm not sure if I can. I'm sure I can find that video. I actually found the video. Holy shit. Okay, so I actually found it. So here's a good like demonstration. Somewhat. I don't know if people actually get this when you're just looking at this, but like this is roughly what that issue is. Like what's happening in the video is like it's moving further away from the center of like when the way you represent the position of that object in order space is like based on like the 3 axes, right? X, Y, Z. So the further away you're moving from the center, like the higher values, the more of this issue you run into. When you're using floating point.